This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, well, good afternoon. Thank you, Norval, for that kind introduction, and thank you to everybody out there on the interwebs for taking time out of your busy schedule to join me today. Full disclosure, I have never given this presentation as a webinar. I've given it plenty of times to groups, and it's usually a very interactive discussion with people sharing thoughts and asking questions. As Norval said, there is a chat box while I'm going through the presentation. I won't be able to see that, but I've told him if there's anything really pertinent, he's free to interrupt me and ask that question. But if not, then we'll have a little time at the end for a Q&A session. So to put a face with the name, I am Jenna Lazenby with B2C Enterprises. We are a full-service marketing and advertising agency in Roanoke, Virginia. We work with clients of all sizes, from startups to university and larger businesses, to help them tell and share their stories through marketing, advertising, and public relations. A lot of our clients are in Southwest Virginia, but we have clients throughout the state and even in neighboring states and out into Colorado. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and get started. And we're going to start by having a little fun and kind of talking briefly about branding from the corporate perspective. And I think one of the ways people recognize brands oftentimes is through a logo. But as you'll discover today, branding, a lot more goes into branding than just a logo. But to get started, I want you all to look at these three logos and think about if you recognize any of them. Now, these are old logos and old company names, so you might not recognize them right off the bat. But that first one, Blue Ribbon Sports, was a company that started in 1964. You might recognize them today. Nike has become a global brand. You probably don't even need that word Nike there. They're really recognized by that swoosh. It's become an iconic brand. The next one, Brad's Drink. I'm wondering how many of you out there have heard of Brad's Drink. Probably not too many. This is a brand that started in a company that started in 1893, and they rebranded in 1898 as what you know today as Pepsi. The last one there, BackRub. You might recognize this one a little bit easier because a lot of the colors and fonts have stayed the same. In 1996, BackRub was launched as a company that analyzed websites' backlinks. In 1997, they rebranded as Google. They actually intended to name the company Goggle, which is the digit 1 followed by 100 zeros. But when they went to type in the domain, they actually mistyped it as Google and liked it more. So a word nobody knew is a word that now everybody knows. All right, so one more. This one might be a little easier as well because the company name is in the logo. This is Apple's logo from 1970. It's kind of cool in that retro sort of way with Newton sitting under that famous apple tree. But can you imagine if today this logo was on the back of every iPhone? It doesn't really possess that sleek, high-tech vibe that you think of now when you think of the word Apple. So I want you to take a second and think about these companies. And you've seen their logos now, what they were and what they are now. But I want you to think about these companies and these brands and what they make you think of. What feelings do they evoke when you think of Apple, Google, Nike, Pepsi? Your brand, whether it's your company's or your own personal, is just that. It's what someone thinks of when they see your face, see your logo, or they hear your name. It's not what you say you are, but it's how you're truly perceived, and it's often connected to your reputation. So we're going to spend some time today delving into what branding is and some of the guidelines that go with branding. But before we do, I want to answer one important question, and that's the why. Why should you care about personal branding, or even branding in general if you're a company? I had Norval send a worksheet to everybody ahead of time, and hopefully you've had a chance to look at that and possibly even print it, because a lot of what we're going to do today is going to refer to that handout. And if you don't have it there with you, then if you could grab a piece of paper and a pen, that would be fantastic. And then you can go back and print out your worksheet and fill it in later. But on the front of that worksheet is a quote that says, "Everyone has a brand by design or default." And that is one of the biggest reasons why, because you have a brand whether you want one or not. And by being more intentional with your brand and really understanding and caring about how you show up in the world, it'll allow you to make more authentic connections. You'll be able to really define your passions, and we'll talk about some of that. Uncover what makes you unique, because that's very important to your brand. And it'll also help you attract new opportunities. Yes, everyone has a brand, but most people don't take the time to strategically, effectively, and consistently manage it. But individuals who do have a well-defined brand usually generate increased value not only for themselves, but also for their company. This is really important. I hope you all understand that your personal brand is the most powerful tool you have to accomplishing your goals, and it is essential to developing in your field, growing in your field, changing careers, and growing a business, be it for sales or fundraising. So let's take a second and go a little deeper with what branding is. Branding sometimes gets confused with a tagline or a logo. Is it just being that if you're a business? Or if you're a person, a lot of people often associate personal branding with social media and what kind of statuses and content people are sharing. But it's often a lot more than that. A brand is how you exist in the hearts and minds of your audience. And for your audience, for a company, it's a little different than what it is personally. For your company, your audience is your employees, your coworkers, sorry, not your coworkers, your employees, your investors, your board members, and anyone who does business with your organization. For you personally, it's your employees, your colleagues, and also your whole network, both professionally and socially, and sometimes those overlap. But also it's potential employers, and of course your family members. Just like Nike, Apple, Pepsi, and Google, you have a brand. And this is a quote I like. Your smile is your logo, your personality is your business card, and how you leave others feeling after an experience with you becomes your trademark. Your brand is how you show up in the world, and it's tied to your reputation. Everywhere you go, you leave an impact on others with your words, but also with your actions. When you work on building your brand intentionally, it requires that you think through your environment, your values, your attitude. Attitude's a big one. Your relationship and your behaviors. While your brand may vary some between your work life and your personal life, there is consistency because a brand is made up of who you are. In my personal life, I'm a brand builder for a marketing and advertising agency, but I also work a lot in my community. I sit on several boards, I volunteer, and that often crosses over into my social network. I also have a son who's 14 years old, and my brand with him is going to be very different with my brand at work, but still, it's all a part of my interactions and how I'm showing up to people. Your brand's fundamental to you. It's important that you first identify what your brand is before you work on starting to be more intentional with it. One of the most common mistakes people make is they dive right into social media. They think that's what branding is. And they do this without a clear vision of who they are and where they want to go. So again, kind of going back to that worksheet, I want everyone to take a minute, and I'm actually going to stop talking for a minute. And I want you to fill in, either on the worksheet or on a piece of paper, how you see yourself. What do you think your brand is? What are your passions, your strengths, your attributes? I'll give you just another few seconds, and if you don't have time to finish writing out all of these, then you can certainly come back to this as you start to, after you leave this presentation and you really start to think about your brand. Okay, so we're going to start looking at some brand traits. And this is by no means a comprehensive list, but I do a lot of work with companies with their corporate brand. I also, of course, do work with their employees to help them flesh out their personal brand as well. But when I work with companies, a lot of times we start by thinking about brand traits, kind of what they want their brand to stand for, what feelings they want to evoke from people. So we're going to kind of go through this list, and we're going to first talk about companies that exhibit these traits, and then we'll look at some personal brands that you'll recognize. So first, sincerity. So those are the companies that exhibit traits that are honest, sincere, down to earth, wholesome. And this is kind of where a lot of times when I'm doing these presentations with a group, I have people kind of shout out brands that they think exhibit these traits. And, you know, a lot of the answers are oftentimes consistent. A couple examples I like to use are Dove. You can think about some of their advertising with, especially geared towards women, with being real. Another great company is Campbell's Soup. That's sincerity. Johnson & Johnson is another good company that really exhibits that wholesome, real traits with a lot of their brands. So think about some other companies that you think of when you think of sincerity. Moving on to exciting. This is always, you know, those companies that are daring, spirited, imaginative. Dos Equis has the most interesting man in the world, or at least they did. I think they've kind of gone away from that. Adidas is another great example of this. And I think that they've done a really good job capturing that cool, young trait, because I tell you, my 14-year-old son won't wear anything but Adidas t-shirts, Adidas sweatshirts, and Adidas shorts. Even his shoes are Adidas. So they're kind of going after that young, cool, hip group. Competence. So these are a lot of your technology companies that want to be seen as hardworking, reliable, technical. These are your GEs, Apples, Google, some of the ones that we talked about in the beginning. It's really important that their brand be seen as extremely competent. Sophistication. So you can think a lot of these are your upper end brands, those luxury brands, often with jewelry or high-end cars like Gucci or Mercedes. It's funny, Gucci's a great example because Gucci is actually a brand that sometimes is used to qualify other brands. So in Roanoke, Kroger is our main grocery store, and there's a couple of really high-end Krogers, and I think pretty much everybody I know refers to them as the Gucci Kroger. That's the Gucci at Kroger in town. So those are they're trying to reach a higher end of the market with that sophistication trait. And the last one I have here, again, I said it's not a comprehensive list, but it's ruggedness. It's those outdoorsy, tough brands. Again, a lot of times with jewelry and cars, Jeep, Range Rover. You have Timex, it takes the licking and keeps on ticking. And so when you think about when companies start really working on their brand, they start by thinking about what traits they want to exhibit, but the same is really true with personal brands as well, and how people want to be recognized. So we're going to go through a couple people that you'll recognize here, and we're going to talk about what their brand is. So here's one, Dalai Lama. He's got a global brand that's composed of wisdom, compassion, good humor, very serene. As we go along, we'll get a little bit more complex with these, but when I pull up this one and I'm in front of a group of people and I ask people what the brand is here, oftentimes the very first answer I get is rich. So I think everybody knows that Oprah's made a global empire, but what really set Oprah apart from the beginning, if you think about her show when it first started even, was her empathy. It's the cornerstone of her personal brand. It's in the tone of her voice, her body language, the words she uses, how she tells a story, how she authentically relates to people. From her earliest episodes 25, 30 years ago, she doled out empathy the way a nurturing grandmother doled out a cup of chicken noodle soup. We're going to get a little more controversial here. Miss Kim Kardashian. She also gets a lot of interesting answers when I pull up her face. A lot of people say nothing more than a face, non-talented. And while some people love her, some people hate her, nobody can deny that she's cultivated an extremely strong personal brand with 7 million Twitter followers. One tweet alone has garnered her $25,000 on behalf of the luxury brand Armani. The fourth person I'm going to pull up is a person who had a really strong brand at one point for quite a long time, but then that brand was tarnished and it changed. And so when I pull up this picture, I want you to think of how you thought about him a couple years ago and what you think of his brand now. So the face of MPC for a long time was competent, reliable, successful. Now, people, when I pull this up, they say dishonest, liar, or abuser. It cost him his job, his reputation, and NBC has deleted as much as they possibly can with his existence. So now that we've kind of talked a little bit about brand traits from both a company and a personal side, we're going to delve into brand guidelines. And I've chosen 4, and we're going to talk about each. These are the 4 that I think are truly important to stand by when you're thinking about your brand, be it from a company or a personal perspective. You might, if you went out there and Googled, you'll probably see more than this. Some people have, more like 7, 8, 10. But these are the 4 that I think are really important. And why number 4, visible, is italicized is because we're going to look at that in 2 different ways. But the first one, authenticity, is really my number 1. Because you can say you're one thing, but if it doesn't stand for what you really are, if it's not true to who you are, true to what your company is, then nobody's going to believe it. You cannot build trust if you're not authentic to what your words and actions are and how you treat people. It's about being you. It's not about just creating that image, but it's about being real. And so we're going to turn back to our website in just a second, but I'm going to take one moment and play a little video for you because it's a little bit of comic relief, but I also think it gets across the point of authentic pretty quickly.
There's my recommendation. Here. And I think you'll be very, very happy. As long as I ever spent on a computer without looking at porn. I don't understand. Some of the words a little too sophisticated for you.
It doesn't make any sense.
Well, of course it does. It's smart. I used a thesaurus.
On every word?
Yep.
What was this sentence originally?
Oh, they are warm, nice people with big hearts.
And that became they are human, prepossessing Homo sapiens with full-sized aortic pumps.
Yeah, and hey, I really mean it, dude.
Okay, Joey, I don't think we can use this.
Why not?
Well, because you signed it, Baby Kangaroo Triviani. Hey, why don't you stop worrying about sounding smart and just be yourself?
You know what? You don't need a thesaurus. Just right from here. Your full-sized aortic pump.
Okay, so just a quick little video to prove my point that even if you might want to be seen as the most intelligent person in a room, if that's not what your brand really is, people aren't going to buy it. And so I want you to take a second and pull out your worksheet or write down on your piece of paper how you think others view you, because it is really critical to understand how others perceive who you are and what your qualities are. So I'm going to be quiet again for another minute or two and let you write that down. Okay, so again, if you haven't had enough time to write that down, and I recognize trying to think about how people see you can be a little difficult, especially off the cuff, but you can spend a little time with this after we're done as well. But I'm going to go ahead and move on and talk about the next one, which is what makes you distinctive, what makes you unique. And again, going back to companies, having that differentiator is really critical to standing out in today's crowded market. And the same is true with individuals. The world's a big place, and it's, you have to kind of know what makes you you and what is unique about yourself. What are you good at? Are you good at performing under pressure? Are you really good at collaborating and bouncing ideas off of other people and working with a group to come up with some brilliant ideas? And what makes you unique is not about just what you do. It's not about just your title, but it is often tied to the company that you work for. And, I know for myself for a long time, it was kind of hard for me to understand that. I always kind of considered myself pretty average. That thought started in high school when I was taking a statistics course, and I learned the average height was 5'5", and the average shoe size for a woman was 6 feet, and I'm right around both of those, and it kind of went along nicely with that average grade I got in that statistics course. And it really wasn't until later in life, when I was almost 40, that I really understood kind of what did make me unique. I had a natural voice for writing. I was able to relate well with people, especially one-on-one or in front of people. I'm much better with that than I am probably on a phone call and maybe even this webinar. But discovering what you're good at is what can help drive your passions and make you successful. I went on to launch a live music blog and website that covered the region's music scene for a couple of years. And that kind of helped guide my career and lead me to where I am today, working with an advertising agency and really going from being a marketing director to working with an advertising agency to help companies build their brands and doing a lot of writing and storytelling. So again, I know we just paused a couple of minutes ago, but we're going to pause again because I want you to take a minute and write down what sets you apart. What makes you unique? What are you really good at? Not just what you do for a living, but what are those business, professional, and personal skills that make you stand out? Okay, hopefully you're putting some thought into this and you have a couple of good ones already jotted down and you can continue to add to that list. We're going to move on and talk about credibility because, again, this is another really important part of a brand, as we saw with Matt Lauer, and you can probably think of with numerous other professional celebrities. Credibility is a huge part of a brand, and if you do something that damages your credibility, it can have a major impact on how people see and view you. So the first C is competence, and this is your ability to do something effectively, do it well. I've been using this example for who I think is really a good one for competence, and it's even more so since Sunday. Gosh, love him or hate him, nobody can say that Tom Brady isn't extremely competent. I've seen so many posts since Sunday about how, unless it's a Pats fan, people do not like Tom Brady, but everyone's saying they don't like him, but gosh, he's one of the greatest of all time to ever play the game of football. This next one's composure, and this is your emotional intelligence. And I've sat through whole sessions just around the topic of emotional intelligence because it's also very critical. It's your ability to keep it together, especially during stress and times of difficulty. We all know those people who, when they're stressed at work or at the office or they have a tough situation, they kind of turn into basket cases. And as a result, they make everybody around them feel uncomfortable or stressed. And I really don't think anybody wants that to be part of their brand. So it's important that you make sure that you are able to retain emotional intelligence, especially during the difficult times. It's easy during times when everything's happy and going well and going your way, but we all know that's not life, and it throws us curveballs, and there's difficult times and difficult situations. And so maintaining your composure is really important. I had a great example of this at a fairly early point in my career. I was working at Virginia Tech in university relations for a couple of years, and I was the news bureau manager and worked with the media during the April 16th tragedy, an incredibly difficult time. And Larry Hinker was the head of university relations and the university spokesperson at that time. And as you can imagine, it was just a really tough, sad, emotional time. And there was a lot of stress. We were inundated with media. Families were upstairs, at the inn, waiting to find out if their children or loved ones had been affected. It was one of the first times anything of this magnitude had happened at a university. And we were kind of all just reeling and trying to hold it together. And Larry Hinker maintained a level of composure and authenticity that I had never quite witnessed firsthand. And I have used that as an example to guide me through my career. And so when you think about credibility and people, I'm sure you all know those people too, and have had those experiences of those who are able to just maintain incredible composure during those difficult times. And the third is character. And character is really tied closely to your actions and values. It is exactly how you treat other people, and also what your actions are, not only when people are watching, but when people aren't watching. And it really, I mean, it's how you make other people feel because of how you treat them. And, you know, I think some really good examples of that are Bill Gates and Bono. And of course, this man right here, I think nobody's tied more closely to Abraham Lincoln, tied more closely to strong character than Abraham Lincoln. So we're going to do another exercise, and this one might make you a little uncomfortable. You might not necessarily want to do it, but every time that I do this exercise with a group of people, I always hear how much they benefited from it and how much they gleaned from talking with people that they know about how they're actually truly seen. So I want you to take out your phone, and you can do this now or you can do it later, but I really encourage you to do this. And I want you to text 5 people. I've given an example on the worksheet. Text them something along these lines. I'm at a seminar about personal branding. Would you please text me a couple words that describe me? Because at this point, we've talked about how you see yourself and how you think people see you, but I really want you to understand how people actually see you. So if you'll take just a minute and type that up and shoot out a couple of texts. And again, if you don't have time to get through it right now, you can pick that back up after we finish the presentation. Okay, in the interest of time, and so we have enough time for some questions at the end, I'm going to go ahead and move on, but I really do encourage you to finish sending these text messages out once we wrap up. And we've talked a lot about understanding who you are and what your brand is, what makes you unique. Now we're going to talk a little bit about visibility and kind of how to communicate that brand. And this is where I work closely one-on-one with companies and also with their employees to kind of figure out how to communicate what your brand is. So as I said, a lot of times people make the mistake of saying, oh, I want to brand myself. I'm going to start putting a bunch of stuff up on social media. Well, that's great, but start first with understanding what your brand what it is, what you want it to be. And then you can kind of go through the social media. And, you can do this through text and written words, status updates, sharing content, also through video. LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram are the 4 most commonly used. Especially some of the younger generations use Snapchat. Some company brands are starting to use Snapchat. So this is by no means an inclusive list, but it's a good place to get started. Technology has really caused a major shift in influence today. And now with social media, one employee can have just as much influence on an entire organization as the brand can. It can do a lot of good, but it can also do some harm, both for an organization and for a person. It can help you build authentic relationships. You can really connect with your customers, with your professional network, with your friends, with your social network, but it can also do some damage. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on social media etiquette. I think it's been around long enough that you've probably all seen those people who've tarnished their reputations and credibility with things like oversharing, dramatic posts, poor grammar. So just quick basic rules to follow. Really try to keep your post positive and try to keep your tone and voice consistent with your post. I really encourage everybody to think before they post, especially if it's something controversial. If there's any doubt in your mind, should I be posting this? Draft it up and walk away from it for a few minutes. It's the same thing I tell people before they send out an email, or maybe they're reacting or something's a little controversial. Type it up and send it to yourself, walk away from it, and then come back to it a few hours later, because a lot of times we're just reacting, and you really want to keep your post positive. Another great way to intentionally communicate your brand is through websites and blogs. I'm not sure if anybody out there has one. If they do, I'd love you to shoot me an email and share it with me. I'd love to take a look at it. I just shut down a blog not too long ago, and I'm in the process of revamping my own personal website and blog, and that'll be launching in the next week or two. So if anyone's interested, you can email me as well, and I'll shoot you the link to that when it's complete and out there. But I really suggest that if you're going to do blogging or craft a website and you haven't done it before, to go and look at some of the influencers in your particular line of work, people you respect, kind of get an idea of their voice, what they're talking about, how they're writing, topics that they're discussing. So for me personally, I follow Seth Godin, Brene Brown, she's wonderful, Tim Ferriss. So you can always just kind of Google whatever your industry or topic is and bloggers, and you won't come up short with different blogs you can look at. I also will say blogging is a really, really good way to help with that credibility portion of your brand, and also to produce content that people care about so that they want to engage with you and know who you are. And this last one is networking and events. These are all your professional conferences, those organizations you're involved with, speaking engagements you perform or you attend. So I helped found the Autonomous Systems chapter of AUVSI in the New River Valley. I sit on the board for that organization. I'm heavily involved with the Roanoke Blacksburg Technology Council, and I lead the WOTEC, the Women in Technology Committee. I sit on Senator Mark Warner's Women's Conference Planning Committee. I'm the head of the Leadership Roanoke Valley Alumni Association, and I also spend a little bit of extra time I can find when I'm not working or watching my son play soccer, volunteering and helping with some community service endeavors. So that's all ways that you can get out there, you can meet people, you can ignite your passions and find different groups and causes that you are really interested in. If anybody has any questions about any of the visibility part, again, feel free to email me and I'll be happy to answer any other questions of that. This is really just a quick overview, and a lot of times I sit down and work with people one-on-one on their strategy for how to implement the visibility and the intentional communication portion of their branding. As I said, we're going to talk about visibility from another standpoint too, because we've talked a lot about the verbal, what you're saying to people, what you're writing, what your social media statuses are, any blogging that you're doing, emails you're sending out. That's 35% of your brand, really only 35% of it. If you think about the other part of your brand, it's all those non-verbals. And, this might be, I can't promise you that these statistics are exactly accurate, but I have pretty good faith that it probably does come down to 35% of what you say and the rest of what those nonverbals are. How many of you have been at a networking event or some type of business meeting and you're in a conversation with someone and you're talking to them and they're half paying attention and they're half looking around the room, looking at who else is there, who else they want to see or talk to? Gosh, isn't that the worst feeling in the world? Doesn't that make you feel like you're not that important, that they don't want to talk to you? So you can imagine if you're doing that to somebody else, if you're not looking at someone in the eye, if you're not giving them eye contact and giving them your time and attention, that they're going to not have the best feeling about who you are when they think about your name, or think about when they hear your name or they see you coming. So really, that eye contact's an important part of this. But all these other items here are important too. Your facial expressions. Are you smiling? Are you engaged? What's your tone of voice? What's your appearance? You know, I'm not saying that you have to be in a luxury designer suit, but you still need to probably get up in the morning and comb your hair if you're going to be meeting face to face with people, and comb your hair and put on something that you feel good in. I mean, what you're wearing and how you feel about yourself, and if you feel good, is going to come across to people you're interacting and engaging with. Also, those gestures and your posture. Are you, standing up straight, leaning forward a little bit? Or are you, kind of slumped over, arms crossed? Are you twiddling with your hair? Are you fidgeting with your fingernails? And I know it's hard to always think about these things all the time, but as you start to really think about who you are and your brand, what your brand is and how you come across, you really need to be thinking about these things too, because they really do reveal, who they really do reveal part of who we really are. Another last one that people don't often think about is your feet. And so a lot of times you can tell if someone's engaged with you and if they want to talk to you based on where their feet are, how they're positioned. And if they're positioned towards the door, you can kind of think that's probably the direction they want to be heading. So consider your nonverbals when you're thinking about your brand. The last part that we're going to talk about before we open it up to questions, and this is really just kind of a quick overview of branding, but is on the back of that worksheet is a brand positioning statement. And this is something that, this is kind of homework. Like, I don't want you all to take time and do this now, but I want you to, later today or tonight or tomorrow or over the weekend when you have time, I want you to kind of sit and think about your brand positioning statement. Some people also kind of call this a little bit of an elevator pitch, but it's, kind of reflects in a sentence or two what you do, who you are, what's the benefit of it, and the reason why you're doing it. And so just as an example, I'll share mine with you. But I'm Jenna Lazenby, and I help companies, their executives, employees, entrepreneurs understand and cultivate their brands to allow them to achieve their goals. I do this because I believe we're better when we understand ourselves and are intentional with our words and, most importantly, our actions. So I'm going to leave you with one of my favorite quotes that I think ties so much into branding. People will forget what you said, they'll forget what you did, but they will never forget how you make them feel. All right, so that's my presentation, and this is my contact information. Again, very high level overview of personal branding. Feel free to shoot me any questions or thoughts you have. I really do hope you will take the time to fill in this worksheet to kind of understand who you are, what sets you apart, and then kind of be more intentional with it. And with that, we'll open it up to questions. Okay, let's see. I'm going to open up this chat box. It looks like there's one. Oh, just a thank you. You're welcome. Okay. So here's a question. So the question is, how often do I update this process and my branding speech? So I'm constantly updating this. In fact, I probably gave this talk 6 times last year, and before I gave it today, I made several updates. I'm always kind of reading and studying branding. I don't think we ever stop learning. And I might have spent a lot of time working with companies and branding. Actually, my very first start was when I was in University Relations for Virginia Tech. That's when we went through the major brand rebranding process where they came up with the tagline "Reinvent the Future." And I was lucky enough, I didn't have much say, but I was lucky enough to be able to attend a lot of that and learn, get a lot of my foundations in branding. And oh gosh, I think that was about 15 years ago. And I've just kind of continually studied branding and worked with clients. And a lot of what I've gleaned has been from my hands-on interactions working with clients and people. But I'm always reading and studying and updating my presentation and what I can share with people. Oh, okay. So there is a follow-up to that, and they asked how often I update my brand positioning statement. Probably not as often as I update my presentation, but because I'm getting ready to launch my new website, I just updated it a couple of weeks ago. So the last time I updated it was probably about maybe a year or so ago, but I do think it's important, and I'm thankful I get to come back to mine a lot, because every time I give this presentation or anytime I have a conversation with someone about branding and personal branding, I'm looking at what my brand statement is. So I think that you start off with something, you take the time, you write one out, you start off with something that you feel really good about. You probably will have some revisions. It's not something you're going to write in 5 minutes. I hate to tell you that. It would be great if it is, but it does take some time and thought and reflection, and it does take some conversations too. Conversations with other people who you respect and who have a good sense of who you are. So I'd say, probably about every year. All right. Are there any other questions or thoughts on branding? Okay, one more. Let's see. How do I tie my branding statement into my business objectives? Do you have a formal process? Well, so at our agency, we, as I mentioned, we do a lot of various work with clients. We, do a lot of branding and rebranding, but we also do a lot of other things. We do a lot of, we make commercials, we do advertising campaigns, we do marketing campaigns, trade shows, collateral material, public relations. And so I kind of get to wear a lot of different hats and do a lot of different things. But branding is something that I do on a regular basis. And so my brand statement actually does tie in pretty closely with my business objectives. And I also, a lot of times as, I'm talking to people and I'm looking for, we always at our agency and in my own work too, we try to find ways of how we can actually help companies and help individuals. Where do they have gaps? Where do they have needs? And so, especially from a personal standpoint, I'm kind of looking at companies and their employees and what needs they have along with the branding, not just from the big picture perspective, but as I said, in today's world, companies now with social media, companies now have it, really, I believe, need to take the time to invest in their employees more than ever, because a lot of employees have that one-on-one connection with customers and clients. And if everybody's not on the same page from what the company brand is, and using the same words and treating people the same, then you're really, your brand's not going to come off as authentic. but you're also missing some opportunities if you're not helping employees really understand their brand and how to be intentional with it. So, so in my job, I spend a lot of time taking the brand work I do in my own branding and implementing it into my business objectives. Formal process, I think when people say what makes them unique, a lot of people say attention to details. It's like one of the most overused statements. And I think details are important, and I certainly pay attention to them. I am not a huge formality person, especially with branding, because I think, I have a process with discovery and getting to know a person or getting to know a company and the questions I ask and the process I go through. But every person in every company is so unique that I don't think a formal process works with each and every person. So I have somewhat of a loop, I have a process, but then it kind of shifts and melds depending on who I'm working with. All right, next question is, do we need to start worrying about branding at the start of our careers or constantly review it? Is it possible to change perception of existing customers? Okay, so a couple great questions there. Branding's kind of like saving for retirement. The earlier you start doing it, the better you are. So I would say yes, you do need to start thinking about your brand at the start of your careers. Because, I go back and I think about who I was 20 years ago when I started my career. And, I didn't have like a designed process for who I was and what I was going to be. And of course, I've changed a lot over my 20 years. But, and I don't think anybody thought about personal branding 20 years ago. I certainly didn't. But I kind of always cared about how I show up in the world. And at the heart of what branding is, and I hope that message has come across, it really is about how you show up in the world, first and foremost, and how you treat other people. And I've always wanted to be a person who people want to see walking down a hall and not the type of person people run from. And so when you think about branding in that regard, then yes, hopefully you're thinking about it even before you start a career. But then I think about with being intentional with it. Again, I taught public speaking in college for a while at Virginia Tech when I was getting my master's degree. And then I went on to teach it for a while at the local community college. And, you get a range of different personalities when you're working with students. But there were some amazing, really talented students who were already branding themselves through blogs and writing. And so, yes, absolutely start. The sooner you start, the better. And the second question, is it possible to change the perception of existing customers? It is, but it's a process. And I think that process starts by first understanding how you are viewed, how you're really seen, what your brand is. And then you can't just all of a sudden say, okay, this is my brand now. This is what people, this is what my customers think. I'm going to just become something totally different. And you just start saying that's what you are. It doesn't work that way. It's a process of understanding what you are, understanding where you want to be, what you want your company to be, and then getting all of your staff on board with that, and making sure that they understand all of it and that you do some training with them. And then you work to slowly start implementing that brand. And it doesn't happen overnight. You can damage a brand overnight, but you can't build a brand overnight. Let's see, what else do we have? And I know we're starting to run short on time. So the next question is, after creating your brand statement, what are some indicators that a brand is being established and succeeding? Oh, well, that's a really good question. And there's not a hard and fast rule on how to understand that. I think with anything, branding, marketing, advertising, everybody always wants to understand what their ROI is. And, what am I getting for this investment, the money, the time, the energy that I'm putting into it? And, it's certainly not an extremely easy thing to quantify. But I think that the more you see people engaging with you, the more that you're asked to speak publicly or be on a committee, or the more business you're getting, or the more you hear, you know, what people are saying. If you're hearing your company's name more, if you're hearing, you know, if you're hearing people out there like, oh, you know, I went to an event last week and someone said to me, gosh, you just seem to be everywhere these days. And I don't know if that means people think I'm overworked or what, but, you know, I think just hearing what people have to say. I tell you, before I was at the aerospace engineering firm, I spent 6 years as a marketing director for a small software company. And we were really small at the beginning. And through the 6 years, we really, you know, I went in, built up a team, and spent a lot of time and energy with the brand and really growing the business. And one of the most successful moments, I think, during that 6-year stint was I was at a conference and I was talking with the CEO of one of our one of our prospects, someone I wanted to be a client. And I said, have you heard of Net Ventures? And he said, are you kidding me? I'd have to live under a rock not to have heard of Net Ventures. So, you know, again, it's not easy to always quantify, but I think you'll slowly start to see how the work is paying off. Okay, so it's 101. There's one last question I'll take here really quick, and then we'll, anybody else can email me or get in touch with me with any other questions. And it says, what bring tears to your eyes, give a glimpse into your character, brand, etc.? I think that's an interesting question. I think that the answer to that probably is unique to each individual as well. I know some people that, you know, probably have a very strong, credible, competent brand who maybe not much brings tears to their eyes as well, you know, at all. But if you're someone like me who kind of easily gets a little emotional or choked up, then yes, I think you could definitely use that. Like, because that shows you what brings tears to your eyes, shows you what you care about, what's really important to you. And what is important to you absolutely lines up with your passions. And your passions are a big part of, you know, your brand and what makes you you, what makes you unique. So if, as you're kind of filling in this worksheet and thinking about your brand, if you want to use that as a barometer, a way to get to answers, then absolutely. All right, well, thank you all so much for your time today. I hope for my first webinar that you've certainly gleaned something from it, and you know, I think that as I said, I'm much better in person, and I really appreciate interactive sessions and people being able to give answers and ask questions and kind of what everybody gets from that experience. But I really do hope you've gotten something out of this today, and it's a starting point for you thinking about how you show up in the world and you move forward from there. Norval, are you still there? Am I good to log off?